Arctic Circle at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which contains hundreds of thousands of different varieties of seeds from all over the world. This place has been known as the Noah's Ark of seeds because in the case of a global catastrophe, this is our last resort for replanting the Earth. 400 feet under the Earth and built to survive a nuclear attack, Svalbard collects seeds from all over the planet. It's here to preserve the bedrock of agriculture, genetic diversity. The Seed Bank's director and founder, Carrie Fowler, brought us inside. So we're just going into the main seed vault in Svalbard. Inside this door, we've got over 13,000 years of agricultural history. Wow, this is a lot of seeds.
It's a lot of seeds.
What was the idea behind building this vault?
The idea was really to put an end to extinction for agricultural diversity. What we've really tried to do here is preserve options for the future.
So that's why these seeds are so important, to breed the next generation of seeds.
That's right. This is the biological foundation of agriculture.
What's the worst case scenario if we start to lose these traits?
Then we're in a waiting game for our major crops to fail and fail permanently.
So without diversity, we face potential starvation.
Oh, absolutely, on a massive and more or less permanent scale.
The fear that our agricultural system could collapse may seem like some distant, unthinkable future, but what if we're already on the brink? For thousands of years, farmers maintained genetic diversity by saving their own seeds. But today, many farmers buy the same seeds from GMO manufacturers. Dr. Major Goodman, a traditional corn breeder, thinks the widespread monocultures of the same GMO crops, also known as transgenics, could be a disaster waiting to happen.
One of my main concerns with transgenics is that the same gene is being used almost worldwide.
Why is that such a big problem?
If something should happen, if one of those families should develop susceptibility to a new disease, we'd be in real trouble.
So one disease could potentially wipe out all the corn?
That's correct. It's just universal. You don't plant the whole world to one thing.
But that's exactly what we're doing. Today, more than 90% of all corn and soybeans grown in America are genetically modified. And just a few large companies control most of the world's seeds. And the biggest of all is Monsanto. Over the last 20 years, Monsanto has transformed from a chemical company known for making Agent Orange into the world's largest agricultural seed company. The man most responsible for these advancements is Chief Technology Officer Dr. Robert Fraley. He sat down with us to explain the importance of GMOs.
We have about 7.2 billion people today. That's going to go to 9.5 by 2050. That means that we have 35 years to basically double the food supply. We will need to produce more food than has been produced in the entire history of the world. That's probably the greatest challenge facing mankind. And I'll tell you, I think we can do it.
Monsanto gave us a tour of their labs to show us how they plan to feed the world.
So this laboratory here, we're looking at over 12 million pieces of DNA to try to find plants that have the best combination of DNA.
But what made Monsanto famous was when they genetically modified their seeds. Their scientists used bacteria to deliver genetic abilities never before seen in any crops. One trait allows the crop to produce a protein so that when a bug eats that plant, it dies. But their most profitable breakthrough was to modify their crops to be tolerant to pesticides. But not just any pesticide, their pesticide.
Roundup kills weeds where others can't. Roundup, no root, no weed, no problem.
Monsanto crops are now genetically engineered to be resistant to Roundup, or glyphosate. This means that you can spray Monsanto's pesticide directly on to Monsanto's crops. And while the weeds around it are poisoned, the plant itself survives. Since Roundup-tolerant crops were introduced in 1996, Roundup has grown to be the most widely used weed killer ever. A lot of people do say that this is just an ingenious way for Monsanto to sell more Roundup.
But I think it's a good thing. Roundup is one of the safest and most effective herbicides that have ever been developed. And today, there's now biotech crops grown in about 30 countries around the world.
One country embracing this GMO model wholesale is Paraguay, where the percentage of farmland growing GM soybeans is larger than any other country in the world.
The scale of soy farms here stretches literally as far as you can see. It's just soy in every single direction.
GMO soy is booming here, and business at the Monsanto distributor has never been better.
We're just taking a tour around Tecalpa. They mostly buy from Monsanto and they distribute to farmers all over Paraguay. Wow. Does everyone in Paraguay grow Monsanto soy?
El 98%.
Now, because the seed genes belong to Monsanto, a farmer is not allowed to replant any of the seeds from last year's crops. Instead, they have to buy new seeds every season.
This is where they're like sorting through all their seeds and separating them by size.
So farmers are buying a lot of Monsanto seeds and also a lot of Roundup.
Whoa, that's loads of Roundup. This is all Roundup, Roundup, Roundup. How much Roundup do you sell every year?
Mucho.
We wanted to know whether insect-resistant and Roundup-tolerant crops were working as advertised. So we went to meet up with some soy farmers.
What kind of soy do you grow here?
Monsanto es.
Have you had any challenges using GM soy?
Sí, muchos problemas de maleza que ya hoy están resistentes al glifosato, que hoy tenemos que hacer mezcla con otros productos. El mohl, que tenemos que sacarlo manualmente. Después tenemos la otra maleza, es muy difícil de controlarlo también. Tenemos el otro.
So none of these weeds were here when you weren't using GM?
Eso surgía con los años.
We found these Roundup-resistant superweeds cropping up on all the soy farms we visited.
How many of these do you normally have?
Millones de plantas se puede tener en un hectare.
And it isn't just the weeds that are getting stronger. In some cases, the bugs are too.
Oh, what are these?
Este es un chinche que consume el grano.
So when did you start getting a problem with these things?
Son aproximadamente 3 años, que es mucho más agresivo que lo antes. Son algunos insecticidas nomás que le controlan.
To combat these superweeds and pests, farmers are forced to use larger quantities of other, more potent chemicals.
So locals call this thing the mosquito because it's got a huge wingspan and it just sprays huge amounts of glyphosate all over these soy farms.
Even though this GMO system is becoming less effective, it's being implemented over so much land, making it difficult and costly to change course.
Do you feel trapped at all by these GM companies?
De cierta forma sí, porque dependemos de la tecnología que ellos nos estén presentando para que nosotros podamos producir.
Back in the 90s, when you guys were applying to the USDA to get Roundup Ready seeds into the US market, you did say in your application that there would not be an issue with glyphosate-resistant weeds. What happened?
The important thing to understand is Roundup is still controlling hundreds of weeds. Now, how do we make that Roundup Ready system work better? How do we use, combinations of other products?
So you're saying that you guys made a mistake back then in the 90s?
As a scientist, absolutely not.
I'm just wondering why you said in the 90s that you weren't expecking any resistance.
I don't know the document you're referring to. I can simply...
I can send it to you. Your application to the USDA.
My view of this as a scientist is resistance is always going to happen.
Monsanto's solution to the problem is a new GMO product. This product contains genes resistant to both glyphosate and a more toxic pesticide that they also make called dicamba.
We're facing a situation of chemical warfare, so it's only the beginning.
Miguel Levera is the former head of Paraguay's GMO regulation agency. Levera thinks the GMO soy model is a good deal for Monsanto, but a bad deal for all small farmers.
The traditional farmers have very, very little possibilities of using any of these soybeans. This model is actually producing large-scale inequality.
What are you doing to support small farmers?
The benefit to the small farmer in every case I've ever seen has been disproportionately greater than to the large farmer because they don't have as many alternatives to begin with.
So you're saying that your products are helping small farmers as much as they're helping big agriculture?
Actually more. And if you give a small farmer a better seed, they'll grow a better crop.
But the seed's high cost makes it impossible for the small farmers to turn a profit on the amount of land they own. In fact, taking Paraguay as a case study, 80% of the farmable land is now owned by less than 2% of the farmers. And additionally, those who grow non-GMO crops are now boxed in by more and more spraying.
This lady says a lot of these crops are damaged when they fumigate the fields right next to her, and the corn doesn't develop as it used to.
Los proyectos flojeros o invadir la comunidad a la hora de semilla, hora de alimentos, ya.
With fewer small farmers growing crops that people eat directly, Paraguay has had to increase its food imports by nearly 300% in just 10 years.
It used to be the case that most of this food that we're seeing sold here would come from small subsistence farmers. Now most of this food is imported. It comes from various parts of South America.
Now hunger in Paraguay has doubled in the past decade. Monsanto's claim was that they want to feed the world. So we spoke to Dr. M. Jahi Chappelle, Director for the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy and an expert on food security.
Monsanto claimed that they're helping to improve food security. Is that the case?
No, not in any meaningful way. The problem with the global food supply is not a lack of food, and it's certainly not a lack of soybeans or a lack of corn, which are the two main genetically modified crops in the world.
Why are companies like Monsanto targeting those monoculture crops?
Oh, it's immensely profitable for the industrial food system to sell more really low quality, low health food to the world, as opposed to growing the diverse crops we need to really all be healthy.
How do these big multinational agricultural companies get into these developing countries in the first place?
The fact that Monsanto's net worth is several times the total GDP of a lot of countries makes it really easy for them to come in and propose, this is the scientific solution to your problems. If we increase our soybean exports in Paraguay, then everyone will be better off. But it's not actually reality.
And it isn't just developing countries that Monsanto is pushing around. They've amassed an incredible amount of influence in the US. We met with Senator Jon Tester, a farmer from Montana. Tester removed language that had been inserted into a US spending bill that would have protected Monsanto seeds from legal action.
Not only does this ignore the Constitution idea of separation of powers, but it also lets genetically modified crops take hold across this country, even when a judge finds it violates the law.
There was evidently somebody that put that language in. Now, nobody took credit for it. I'm assuming that they put it in at Monsanto's behest.
Do you think it's the case that the US government has been helping the biotech industry?
I think there are people within the Senate and within the House that absolutely do that. This is a different way of doing business for agriculture, and I always get really nervous when farmers have always had control of their seed from the beginning of time, and the seed will have to be bought every year by the farmers from an agribusiness company. So I think as we move forward, we need to do it cautiously, and we need to know what we're getting into.
Shortly after this interview was shot, the World Health Organization declared glyphosate, the key chemical sprayed on these crops, a probable carcinogen to humans. Dr. John McLaughlin was on the team that reached this conclusion.
Why are you coming out and saying glyphosate could cause cancer?
One of the main reasons for a difference is just that there's more evidence that accumulates over time. And I think it's an important message to get out. Why don't we do these studies and begin to better understand whether there are such health effects?
So Monsanto's response is that you guys have been cherry-picking your data, that this is inconsistent with decades of previous studies, and that it's an agenda-driven process. What do you make of that?
It's a rock-solid process. Classifying anything as a carcinogen is a warning flag for all of us.
As genetically modified crops continue to spread across the world, they've become staple ingredients in a lot of our processed foods and in the feed for our livestock and poultry. While the European Union and many other developed nations have laws requiring foods with GMO ingredients to be labelled, the US has no such law.
If companies like Monsanto are so very proud of this, they ought to label it for the consumer, just like they do in Russia and China. This is our food supply. This is about what we're feeding our kids. And I think that gives the consumers the ability to make a decision on what they want to buy in the supermarket shelf. And that's the way it should be.